So my name is Toni Cela, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this important panel. I represent the Interuniversity Institute for Research and Development in Haiti. We're a research institute that conducts research to affect policy and practice changes in Haiti. So my interest in migration research began with actually studying diaspora populations and looking at the academic diaspora to Haiti and their role in Haiti's post-disaster reconstruction after the 2010 earthquake. So through that, I began, I was interested in looking at issues of generation, because over the course of Haiti's history, we've had waves of migration outside of Haiti. And also thinking about the context of it, how are you rooted in a home to which you were involuntarily brought? And how does that impact, your decision to migrate thereafter? Are we migrating, voluntarily in the contemporary times, or are we migrating because of other factors beyond our control? So that also led to an interest in issues of class and migration, as well as gender, and how the genders, how decision-making is different across gender. And so that would kind of generally sum up my interest and the intersectional approach that I take to migration studies.
Thank you very much, Franzisca, for keeping me in the team. It's always been wonderful working with you. I'm so sorry that I could not come to the panel, but thank you for the opportunity of recording. In terms of your questions around what led me to start working on migration, my PhD was on displacement because we were having conflict, the Maoist conflict in Nepal at that time when I started my PhD. So I was looking at internal migration rather than international migration. But as I started doing my research and continuing work on migration, internal migration, people started to move internationally, labor migration to the Gulf countries, and people migrating to study to other countries became a very common phenomena. So slowly I started working on other kinds of migration as well. And I think it's been more than 15 years now that I've been working on migration. And I always find things new and very interesting. So quite interested in the work.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And yes, in terms of the migration, researching migration, I have a few decades. I've been working on that issue in different hats, because as academics, I was researching migration, negative narratives of migration, which is much more on trafficking and forced migration with Newcastle University, UK. And then I joined UN Migration, working in Central Asia and North Africa and South Asia and various parts of the country. So I was basically looking at migration policy, what are the policies of the countries of origin and also the countries of destination. So, and now the last couple of years, as an independent researcher, I have been involved with this MIDEC research project as an advisor, member of advisory board. So again, looking at various policies and also the gender dimension and access to justice portfolio, and also the migrant strategy, how they cope with these various discriminatory practices of their own country of origin, and also the country of destination where they work. Basically looking at how these bilateral agreements are working, and bilateral agreements are supportive to migrant or not, and what are the challenges countries are facing to get bilateral agreement effective. So these are the area I have been working on that, and particularly focusing on gender and intersectionality, because in migration, population is a heavily diverse population all over the region I work with. So Yeah, the intersectionality is important for me, and the gender, of course, is the center of the migration process, and also the policy framework, the policy regimes, how they are drafted, and who get benefit, and who decide policy, and what migrant population get out of those policies, whether the protection mechanisms are effective or not, if something goes wrong, where they get justice. So these are the area I have been working for several years, almost 2 decades.
So, in reference to looking at migration and gender, one of the things that we have noticed in our research with MIDEC, which is Migration for Development and Equality, in our research looking at South-South migration from Haiti to South America, particularly Brazil and Chile, is that although autonomous migration, particularly among females, has increased over the past decade, that often results in forms of empowerment, but it's also underlaid or undergirded by reinforcement of social hierarchies, inequalities across genders. So, for example, we have found that over the past 5 to 7 years, more women with higher levels of education are migrating autonomously to Brazil to seek further educational opportunities, or to Chile to seek out, labor opportunities, and are not necessarily migrating as a result of family reunification, which has generally been the trend for women migrating. And yet, while they are empowered enough to make the decision, often on their own or with the support of social networks and families, once they arrive at destination, they either become engaged in relationships that reinforce, gender-based hierarchies, patriarchal systems. So, for example, attaching themselves intimately to a male partner who is already integrated into the destination country to help facilitate their own integration, to help them secure lodging, to help them navigate this new society. So while we understand that autonomous migration for women may be on the rise, and it may be a form of empowerment as it allows them to earn their own, salaries, or earn more, attain more education. But we also have to think about and consider in what ways they may be reinforcing social hierarchies that they were trying to escape from their homeland.
So my own work on better understanding of migration and gender, since 2008, we started producing the Migration Yearbook. Currently, it's being produced by the government of Nepal with ILO and IOM. But from 2008 to 2013, we were producing Migration Yearbook, which compiled all kinds of migration, and it was a Swiss government funding. So at that time, we already saw that there was, the migration of male and female migrants takes place in a very different context. The outcomes are very different. The pathways are very different. So from 2002, 2008 to 2013, we've been writing about how things were different for migration. The other aspect of my work on migration is looking at the household. So, even when there's a large number of men migrating, the impact on women is great because they stay back as wives and as mothers, and there's a lot of impact on them. So throughout my work, I've contributed also to understanding the impact men's migration has on women as well.
Yes, my long and committed work has been on looking at trafficking element within migration process, because the trafficking is part of the broader migration framework, but this is negative narratives, and how the recruiting agencies and the intermediaries and agents, and also the highly gender labor market, and how they exploit women, how they create that vulnerable situation where aspirant women and women who decide to migrate and get into trafficking nexus. So, And also when they return from, particularly the women who return from migration, whether it's a labor migrant or traffic women or smuggled women, when they return home, their home country, they looked at women in different perspectives, saying that, okay, where these women went and what she did and why she is back, and the way they see her, they see from negative perspective, and it's very much linked with the women's sexuality, where and they will ask several questions, which questions are not necessarily they ask to male migrant. So the additional challenges, additional stigma, additional questions that women have to respond and cope with. So that is why that is the situation in their own society. And workplace, I found in South Asia, in North Africa also, and also in Central Asia, I found that women migrant are, of course, badly paid. And if they are trafficked, no pay at all. The labor and sexual exploitation is there. And the job they get, because of their the gender identity, they have very limited option to learn skills back home. And they are less educated, less skilled, less aware, and less confident. And they get into more vulnerable situation because of their own gender and social identity. So the women migrant are the bottom of the whole migration management structure. And then also they are more exploited throughout the process.
So some of the achievements is really increasing a focus on, gender. So for example, in the literature on Haiti, there's been research that has looked at, how women who remain in Haiti, how they strategically use remittances to support their families, to increase access to education for their children, and how that might differ from male recipients of remittances. We are also looking at the experiences of people who remain in country and how those experiences are pertinent to the success or the challenges faced by migrants who are abroad at destination, and really looking at migration processes as not just going from and to, but also as circulatory, and all based on decisions that are important for individual self-actualization, important to families coming out of poverty and creating opportunities for the next generation, and also important to community development. So for example, in Haiti, we have a lot of hometown associations who benefit from, migrant contributions. So, we are looking more broadly at migration, and that includes looking at the gender aspects. But one of the gaps that remains is really we need a more grounded approach in critical analyses that look beyond, we tend to have a Western lens in the way that we understand family, gender, family dynamics. For example, in Haiti, while women are underrepresented in politics, they're underrepresented in the formal labor market, they are overrepresented in the informal labor market. And they also have their own networks, savings networks and networks for generating income through different agricultural associations and women's organizations. So when we think about decision-making in the migratory process, I think we need a more grounded approach that focuses centrally, particularly on the experiences of women, and particularly young women, including those who migrate and those who remain in country, to understand how they experience migration and how they strategically use their agency to influence decisions, to influence who migrates, that we may not necessarily have been aware of otherwise.
I think theoretically, globally, we are expanding a lot. There was an era of looking at just pull and push factors, and then we started talking about transnational migration theoretically, and then we developed into a better and a more minute understanding of migration over the years. So I think there's been a lot of change a forward change in the way migration is being understood globally now. We are linking it with the MDGs and the SDGs and with other local development goals and plans of the country as well. So I think it's going forward in a very good direction. I think that's it. In Nepal also, there's a lot of good work happening. So for example, there's a lot of focus currently on return, which was not the case before. The COVID research around COVID, the impact of COVID has highlighted the impact of migration on people's daily life, on issues of human rights and access to justice, which are very important part of migration. So I think there's a lot of dimension of migration we are touching. In Nepal, migration touches lives of almost like 50% of the households in Nepal, because over 50% have some form of migrants. But the way we are looking at migration more holistically now than ever, looking at many different dimensions of migration from the impact, but also looking at like why people go, what are their pathways, how are the pathways different according to many kinds of differences that people have in the society and all. But still, like, the gaps remain. I think one of the biggest gap is understanding now return migration and in what context it takes place and what happens after migration. There's a lot of remigration from Nepal. We don't know so much about remigration. And the other big gap is knowing more about the destination country, because there are only a few research that focuses on Nepalese, for example, living in the destination country, or migrants in the destination country when they are in the destination country. So I think this is a big gap.
My contribution is that I can give you one contribution. When I was in Afghanistan, this is beyond MIDEC. Before I joined MIDEC, in Afghanistan, situation was very challenging because of the political situation and also the Afghan society, the socio-cultural discrimination and the perception towards women's sexuality and women's mobility. So what I did was I wanted to understand what are the differences between Afghan society and other countries, for example, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. I was covering, and also my own country, Nepal. So I was interested to understand what are the differences in gender perspective and attitude of society towards female migrant. Also, the additional what I found in Afghan was that Afghan women were not supported to cross the border. When they go, following informal mechanism, extremely difficult to get back to society and they get accepted by their family. That is what I found in my research in Afghanistan. And but similar research I started doing in Libya was slightly different. Yes, there were some challenges, but slightly different than Afghanistan, more relaxed and more flexibility on mobility in Libya. So what I'm trying to say is that the women's mobility and women's migration decisions are very much depend on social perception and the socio-political context, and of course how society perceive the female sexuality. What I found is very, very different. And in Nepal and India, I did research, was also yes, sexuality issue, perception issue, very gender perception is everywhere. But here in Nepal, India case also, I found that the caste issue, ethnicity issue, which was not that strong in Afghan and Libya context. So when we talk about intersectionality, so the intersections are very, very different and very much depend on particular society, particular caste, ethnicity, and particular the mechanism of border management.
So I guess I'm particularly interested in looking at policy in this regard. For example, a lot of our work on migration looks at I think the two pillars of migration generally are informed by labor needs, the need for professionals to migrate to countries from the perspective of host societies. So migration policies are often shaped by labor needs, professional needs, and those tend to advantage men who tend to have higher levels of education, expertise in technical training, or can engage in low-skill, arduous labor, to meet labor demands in host countries, disadvantaging women. Secondly, we tend to look at family reunification, and those are the circumstances under which many women join their partners in the host country. And I think that it's important for us to look at migration outside of these two kind of frameworks of policy, because we need to understand, well, we need to look at young women in particular, and what are the opportunities and what are the challenges and how decisions are made with that particular population that has the potential to migrate, may or may not. And I think that when we frame our studies around existing policies that inform who can or cannot migrate, we miss those who migrate under other circumstances as undocumented individuals, and also their perspectives that could inform the development of new policies that would make it facilitate their own migration. And I think that would be an approach that would impact our understanding on gender and migration as a whole.
There are two things, Franzisca. So I think it's not feminist. I think we are looking at, equity in migration, because as I shared before, the context in which migration takes for women and men is very different. The pathways are also very different. In Nepal, the policies for male and female migration are quite different. It's much more restrictive towards women. So I think having an equitable outcome, taking into account the differences in context is very important. I would love to have that kind of that kind of achievement for the feminist migration future, looking at things in an equitable way, both in terms of how the migration takes place, the context, the policies, and the outcomes for migration, and most importantly also for return and reintegration, because reintegration prospectus, particularly for female labor migration, is very bleak here. It's very difficult for women to reintegrate into the society properly when they return back, despite despite the fact that they are very good remitters. So I think having that kind of equitable achievement and having policies that promote equitable achievement is something that I think would be great. The other thing is, we always find, at least from South Asia, female migrants are much more, men are also vulnerable, but female migrants are much more vulnerable than male migrants in the destination country. So a feminist migration future should also see to it that they are safeguarded and they have their rights and equality and equity in the destination country as well. So this is that would be fantastic, I think.
I'm quite hopeful that the more awareness is being raised now. The women, as I say initially, that is my almost more than 2 decades work experience. If I reflect back my beginning 20 years back, and the level of awareness was very, very low. The society was more conservative than now. And the media activism and the human rights activism was also not that vibrant. So now the things are changing. So women are also becoming much more aware and more educated than before. But at the same time, the labor market is becoming much more complex and much more competitive, and also I use term toxic, because yes, there are opportunities and women are also able to grasp those opportunities, but at the same time, opportunities are coming with the more vulnerability and the more challenges. So I think the opportunities and challenges are going in parallel way, but I'm quite optimistic that compared to past, wherever I work in 15 different countries, compared to past, the migration management regimes are also the migration management regime for me is that migration management framework from the government side. They are also becoming aware. I know they are not that proactive and that they are not more organized the way we think, but things are changing gradually. Things are changing slowly. There are challenges ahead, but the traditional challenges are also there, but at the same time, new challenges are also there. At the same time, new opportunities are also there. So I see from that angle.